The wail of the train whistle pierced the still morning air, sending a flock of startled birds skyward as the locomotive slowed to a halt at the Fort Yuma station. Amidst the billowing steam and grinding of metal against metal, Madeline Kane stood alone on the wooden platform, her hands trembling as she clutched her single reticule, the only possession that remained after a devastating discovery made just minutes earlier. "My trunk," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion of the arriving train. "All my things. Gone." The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly on her pale skin, already turning it a delicate pink. Madeline had journeyed all the way from Boston, traveling for nearly 2 weeks, clutching the letters from Mr. Yates Newcomb like precious talismans. The correspondence that had brought her across the country to marry a man she'd never met now seemed like a cruel joke as she stood alone, without even a change of clothes to her name. The station master, a thin man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, shook his head sympathetically. "I'm mighty sorry, madam. These things happen sometimes. Train robbery 2 stops back might be the cause. We've had reports." Madeline fought back tears. 23 years old, and she had gambled everything on this journey west. Her parents gone, her family home sold to pay their debts, and her teaching position lost when the school closed. Becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only option. Now she stood in the harsh sunlight of 1876, wondering if she'd made the most foolish decision of her life. Is there someone meeting you, miss?" the station master asked, glancing around the nearly empty platform. Before she could answer, the sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks caught her attention. Madeline turned to see a tall figure approaching through the heat shimmer. The man's broad shoulders were silhouetted against the harsh sun, a well-worn Stetson casting shadows across features she couldn't yet discern. "Miss Kane." The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of years under western skies. Madeline straightened her spine, summoning what dignity she could. "Mr. Newcomb." As he drew closer, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind, yet not unkind. Lines at the corners of his eyes suggested he smiled often. He was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the sky after a storm. "Yes, madam, Yates Newcomb." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with the slightest touches of silver at the temples. "I'm pleased to finally meet you in person." His eyes took in her lone reticule, the absence of luggage, and the distress she couldn't quite hide. "Is something wrong, Miss Kane?" the station master interjected. "Ladies' trunks gone missing. Might have been taken during that Yuma Pass robbery." Madeline watched as Yates Newcomb's expression darkened momentarily before his eyes met hers again. "Is that right?" he asked softly. "I'm afraid so," Madeline admitted, her voice wavering slightly. "Everything I own was in that trunk. My clothes, my mother's locket, my books. Everything." For a long moment, Yates said nothing, merely studying her face with an intensity that made her wonder if he was reconsidering their arrangement altogether. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. "Miss Kane," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I don't know what kind of man you expected to find waiting for you, but I hope I'm not about to disappoint you with what I'm going to say." Madeline's heart sank. Here it was the rejection she had feared. Without her meager possessions, she wasn't even the modest bride she'd promised to be. Instead, Yates Newcomb surprised her. "I'll give you everything you need and more," he said simply. "Whatever was lost can be replaced. What matters is that you've come all this way and you're here now." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly undid her composure. "Mr. Newcomb, please," he interrupted gently. "Call me Yates. After all, we're to be married." A warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat spread through Madeline's chest. "Yates," she said, testing the name on her tongue. He nodded, seemingly pleased, then offered his arm. My wagon's just over yonder. We've got about a 2-hour ride to the ranch. I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of arranging for us to be married tomorrow. Pastor Wilson doesn't come through these parts too often. Tomorrow. The word struck Madeline like a physical blow. She had expected at least a few days to prepare, to become acquainted with the man she would pledge her life to. Seeing her hesitation, Yates quickly added, "Unless you'd prefer to wait, of course. I wouldn't want to rush you." "No," Madeline said, finding strength in his consideration. "Tomorrow is acceptable." Yates smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face, making him appear younger, less weathered. "Good. Now, let's get you out of this heat before you burn to a crisp. Boston didn't prepare you for an Arizona summer, I reckon." As they walked toward the wagon, Madeline became acutely aware of her appearance, her travel-worn dress, her hair falling loose from its pins after the long journey. "I'm afraid I'm not presenting myself very well. Everything suitable was in my trunk." Yates helped her up onto the wagon seat with surprising gentleness for hands so calloused. "Miss Kane, Madeline, if I may. A woman who travels across the entire country alone, who faces the loss of all her possessions with the composure you've shown, doesn't need fancy dresses to impress me." As the wagon pulled away from Fort Yuma station, Madeline Kane found herself sneaking glances at the profile of the man beside her. His letters had been straightforward, practical, a rancher seeking a wife, offering security and respect if not romance. Yet there was something in his manner, in the quiet strength and unexpected kindness, that gave her hope that perhaps she had not made a terrible mistake after all. The wagon rolled out of town, leaving behind the dusty streets and sparse buildings of Fort Yuma. The landscape opened up before them, vast, wild, and breathtakingly beautiful in its harshness. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the blue sky, while in the distance, rugged mountains shimmered in the heat. "It's beautiful," Madeline breathed, despite herself. Yates glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most Eastern ladies find it desolate." "It's honest," she replied. "There's no pretense here. The land is exactly what it appears to be." Something in Yates's expression shifted. "That's a rare perspective, Miss Kane." "Madeline, please," she said, feeling emboldened. "If I'm to call you Yates, then turnabout seems fair." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Madeline, then." As they traveled, Yates pointed out landmarks, a rock formation said to be sacred to the local tribes, a distant river that provided life, giving water to the parched land, and eventually, the boundaries of his own property. "The rocking end spans about 1,200 acres, he explained. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but good land. Got about 500 head of cattle and a dozen horses. Been building it up these past 8 years. "Alone?" Madeline asked, realizing how little she truly knew about this man. Yates was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "Had a partner once. My brother, Marcus. He died 3 winters back. Pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Madeline said softly. "I lost my parents last year. Influenza." Their eyes met briefly, a moment of understanding passing between them, the shared experience of loss creating an unexpected connection. "That why you answered my advertisement?" he asked. Madeline nodded. "With my parents gone and the family home sold to pay debts, I had few options. I was teaching at a small school, but it closed when the mill in town shut down. Families moved away seeking work." Yates considered this. "You're educated then? A teacher?" "Yes, is that a problem?" He shook his head. "No, just wondering why an educated woman like yourself would choose to marry a rancher you've never met." His directness was refreshing after the circumspect conversations she was accustomed to in Boston society. Security, she answered honestly, and perhaps a new beginning. Yates seemed to accept this. Well, I can promise you the first. The second, that's up to you to find. As they crested a small rise, a ranch house came into view. It wasn't large, but it was solidly built of adobe and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse, and various smaller structures. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the sparse vegetation. Home, Yates said simply. Madeline felt a flutter of anxiety. This would be her home now, too. This place, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, would be where she would build a life with this man she barely knew. As they approached, a Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Beside her stood a young girl of perhaps 14 or 15, her dark hair braided down her back. That's Rosa Mendez, Yates explained. She comes from town 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning. Her daughter, Lucia, usually comes along. The wagon rolled to a stop, and Yates jumped down before coming around to help Madeline descend. As her feet touched the ground, the reality of her situation truly struck her. This was to be her home. This man, her husband. "Senor Newcomb," Rosa called out, her face creasing in a smile. "You have returned with your bride." Her English was heavily accented but clear. "This is Miss Madeline Kane," Yates introduced. "Madeline, this is Rosa Mendez and her daughter Lucia." "Bienvenida, Señorita Kane," Rosa said warmly. "Welcome to Rocking Inn." "Thank you," Madeline replied, grateful for the welcome. "Rosa," Yates said, his tone more serious, "Miss Kane's trunk was lost during her journey. She'll need some necessities." Rosa's expression shifted to one of concern. "Ay, que terrible. Do not worry, señorita, we will help." "Lucia can ride into town tomorrow morning with a list," Yates suggested. "And perhaps you could help Miss Kane with anything urgent she might need tonight." "Of course, señor," Rosa agreed readily. She turned to Madeline with a motherly smile. "Come inside out of this heat. You must be exhausted from your journey." As Madeline followed Rosa toward the house, she glanced back to see Yates watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. He nodded once, as if to reassure her, before turning to unhitch the horses. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly cool after the heat outside. The main room was spacious, with simple but sturdy furniture, a large table with chairs, a settee near the fireplace, and bookshelves built into one wall. Madeline's eyes were drawn to those shelves, surprised to find them filled with volumes. Rosa noticed her interest. "Senor Newcomb is a man who values learning," she commented. "He reads every night." This small revelation shifted something in Madeline's perception of her husband to be. A rancher who read regularly was not what she had expected. "Let me show you to your room," Rosa continued. "You can rest before dinner." The bedroom was at the back of the house, with windows facing west. A large bed dominated the space, covered with a colorful quilt. A washstand, dresser, and small writing desk completed the furnishings. "This will be your room," Rosa explained. "Senor Newcomb has been sleeping in another room these past weeks, preparing for your arrival." Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication. "After tomorrow, this would be their shared room. I've put fresh water in the pitcher," Rosa continued, tactfully changing the subject. "And I can lend you a nightgown for tonight. Tomorrow we will see about getting you proper clothes." "Thank you," Madeline said sincerely. "You're very kind." Rosa patted her hand. "It is nothing. Senor Newcomb is a good man. He deserves happiness." After Rosa left, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the day's events. She had arrived with nothing, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Yet something about Yates Newcomb's quiet strength and unexpected consideration gave her courage. Perhaps this marriage of convenience would not be the cold, practical arrangement she had prepared herself for. Outside the window, she could see Yates at work, leading the horses to the barn. His movements were sure and confident, a man at ease in his environment. Tomorrow, she would pledge herself to him, this stranger who had already shown her more kindness than she had dared to hope for. For the first time since learning of the loss of her trunk, Madeline felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps here, in this wild and honest land, she might indeed find that new beginning she sought. Dinner that evening was a simple but hearty affair: beef stew, freshly baked bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Madeline, having washed and changed into a dress borrowed from Rosa, a bit too large but clean and presentable, joined Yates at the table. "I hope you're finding everything satisfactory," he said as they ate. "Yes, thank you," she replied. "Your home is lovely." Yates glanced around the room as if seeing it through her eyes. "It's not what you're used to, I expect." "Different, certainly, but not in a bad way," Madeline assured him. "May I ask you something, Yates?" he nodded, setting down his fork. "Anything." "Why did you advertise for a mail-order bride? A man like you with property, education. Surely there are women in the territory who would be interested in marriage." Yates considered her question carefully before answering. "Not many unmarried women in these parts, and those who are tend to be looking for something different than what I can offer." "What do you mean?" "Most want to move to a bigger town or back east. They dream of fancy parties and city living. I'm a rancher, Madeline. This land, these cattle, they're my life. I needed a wife who understood that, who wouldn't resent this place after the shine wore off. And you thought a desperate Eastern spinster would fit that description." There was no accusation in her tone, merely curiosity. Yates's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I wouldn't have put it quite that way, but yes. I figured a woman willing to travel across the country to marry a stranger was looking for something solid, not romantic notions." "That's fair," Madeline admitted, "though I'm hardly a spinster at 23. "No," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "You're not." A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. "What about you?" Yates finally asked. "What are you hoping to find here besides security?" Madeline considered the question. "Peace, perhaps, a purpose. In Boston, after my parents died, I felt adrift, unnecessary to the world. And you think you'll find purpose as a rancher's wife?" "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'd like the chance to try." Yates nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He hesitated before adding, "About tomorrow, the wedding. If you want more time, I understand. Meeting me might not be what you expected." "Is it what you expected?" Madeline countered. "Meeting me?" A slow smile spread across his face. "No, Miss Kane, you're not what I expected at all." "Better or worse, different," he replied, "but not in a bad way." They shared a small smile, recognizing her own words returned to her. "Tomorrow is fine," Madeline decided. "We made an agreement and I see no reason to delay." "All right then," Yates said, rising from the table. "I've got some chores to finish before dark. Make yourself at home." After he left, Madeline found herself drawn to the bookshelves. The collection was eclectic. Practical manuals on ranching and animal husbandry sat alongside volumes of poetry, history, and even a few novels. She ran her fingers along the spines, finding comfort in this unexpected connection to her past life. She selected a volume of Emerson's essays and settled into the chair near the window, watching as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in gold and amber. Outside, she could see Yates moving between the barn and corral, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Tomorrow she would become his wife. The thought no longer filled her with the anxiety it had before. Instead, She felt a curious blend of apprehension and anticipation, the feeling of standing at the threshold of something new and unknown, but potentially wonderful. As darkness fell, Madeline prepared for bed in the room that would soon be theirs. Lying beneath the colorful quilt, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night, she realized that for the first time since her parents' deaths, she was looking forward to the dawn. The morning of her wedding day broke clear and bright, the rising sun sending shafts of golden light through the bedroom window. Madeline woke early, her body not yet adjusted to the time difference. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself to her new surroundings before the realization dawned today she would become Mrs. Yates Newcomb. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Señorita Kane," Rosa's voice called. "Are you awake?" "Yes, come in," Madeline replied, sitting up and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Rosa entered carrying a tray with coffee and what appeared to be freshly baked biscuits. "Buenos dias. I thought you might like breakfast before we begin preparations." "Preparations?" Madeline echoed, accepting the cup of coffee gratefully. Rosa beamed. "For your wedding. Señor Newcomb rode to town very early this morning. He has returned with many things: fabric for a dress, ribbon, even new shoes for you. Lucia and I will help you get ready." Madeline set down her cup in surprise. He bought fabric for a dress, but how could it possibly be sewn in time? Ah, he bought a ready-made dress too from Mrs. Peterson's shop. For today. But he said a proper bride should have a dress made specially for her, so he bought fabric for me to sew later. Rosa's expression was warm with approval. "He is a thoughtful man, no?" "Yes," Madeline agreed softly. "He is." After breakfast, Lucia arrived carrying a large box. "Señorita Kane, look what Mr. Newcomb brought." Inside the box lay a dress of deep blue fabric, simple in design but well made, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Beneath it were new shoes, a pair of silk stockings, and even a small bottle of lavender water. "It's beautiful," Madeline whispered, touching the fabric reverently. "He asked Mrs. Peterson what would fit a lady of your height and build," Rosa explained. "He was very specific about the color. He said it should match your eyes." Madeline felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had mentioned the color of her eyes in one of her letters, a casual detail she never expected him to remember. With Rosa and Lucia's help, Madeline bathed and dressed. The blue dress fit remarkably well, perhaps a touch loose at the waist, but otherwise as if made for her. Rosa arranged Madeline's hair in a simple but elegant style, weaving a ribbon through the dark strands. "There," Rosa said, stepping back to admire her work. "You are a beautiful bride, señorita." Madeline stared at her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the one who had stepped off the train yesterday, more confident, hopeful, perhaps even happy. A knock at the bedroom door announced Lucia's return. "Señorita, the pastor has arrived and Mr. Newcomb is waiting in the main room." Madeline took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you, Lucia. I'm ready." When she entered the main room, she found it transformed. Wildflowers filled jars on the table and mantel, their bright colors bringing cheer to the rustic space. Pastor Wilson, a kind-faced older man, stood near the fireplace, Bible in hand. And there was Yates, turned out in his best clothes, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and trousers that had clearly been pressed for the occasion. His hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously hidden by stubble. But it was his expression when he saw her that caught Madeline's breath. His eyes widened slightly, and something like wonder crossed his features before he composed himself. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she reached his side. "Thank you," she replied softly, "for everything." The ceremony itself was brief but sincere. They exchanged vows, promising to honor, cherish, and remain faithful to each other. When Pastor Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Yates hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Madeline's lips, their first touch of that kind. It was brief, almost chaste, but Madeline felt its warmth spread through her entire body. After the ceremony, Rosa served a wedding feast that she had clearly been preparing since dawn: roasted chicken, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and a small cake decorated with preserved fruit. "A toast," announced Pastor Wilson, raising his glass, "to Mr. and Mrs. Newcomb. May your union be blessed with prosperity, happiness, and many children." Madeline felt herself blush at the last part, but Yates merely smiled, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of his glass. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur. Pastor Wilson departed after the meal, and Rosa and Lucia cleared away the dishes before also taking their leave, promising to return the next day to begin work on Madeline's proper dresses. As the sun began to set, Madeline found herself alone with her husband for the first time since their vows. An awkward silence fell between them as they sat on the porch, watching the changing colors of the sky. "I want you to know," Yates finally said, his voice low, "that I understand this is unusual, getting married to someone you've just met." "It's what we agreed to in our letters," Madeline pointed out. "Yes, but agreeing to something in a letter and facing it in person are different things." He turned to look at her directly. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'll give you everything you need, Madeline. That includes time if you want it." Understanding dawned on her. He was offering to delay the physical aspect of their marriage until she was more comfortable. "I appreciate that, Yates," she said softly. "Truly." He nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, I don't want you to ever feel obligated." "What about you?" Madeline asked, finding courage in his consideration. "You advertised for a wife, not just a housekeeper. Surely you have expectations." Yates was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the sunset. "I advertised for a partner," he clarified. "Someone to share this life with. The rest. That's important too, but it's not why I wanted to marry." "Then why did you?" he sighed, the sound weary but not unhappy. "Because this land, this ranch, it's too much for one person. Not the work, though that's part of it. It's the solitude. After Marcus died, I realized I didn't want to face the rest of my life alone." His honesty touched something deep within Madeline. "I understand that," she said. "After my parents died, the silence in our house was unbearable." Their eyes met, another moment of connection forming between them. "So," Yates said after a moment, "we take our time, get to know each other, build something real." "I'd like that," Madeline agreed. Later that night, Yates insisted on sleeping in the spare room despite Madeline's assurance that she wouldn't object to sharing the bed. "We've got time," he reminded her. "Let's do this right." Alone in the large bed, Madeline reflected on the day's events. She had arrived in Fort Yuma with nothing but a reticule and the clothes on her back, yet somehow she felt richer than she had in years. Yates Newcomb was not the husband she had imagined. He was better. Thoughtful, considerate, and surprisingly gentle for a man who had carved a life out of such rugged land. As sleep claimed her, Madeline realized that the anxiety that had plagued her since agreeing to become a mail-order bride had finally begun to fade, replaced by something that felt remarkably like hope. The first weeks of marriage brought a flurry of activity as Madeline settled into life at the Rocking Inn. With Rosa's help, she soon had several new dresses, undergarments, and even a riding habit, as Yates insisted that every ranch wife should know how to ride. True to his word, Yates was patient, giving Madeline time to adjust to her new role. They slept in separate rooms, though they spent their evenings together, talking by the fire or reading companionably. Through these conversations, Madeline began to truly know the man she had married. She learned that Yates had come west at 18, following his older brother Marcus after their parents died. They had worked other ranches before saving enough to buy their own land. Yates had been educated in Boston until he was 16, which explained his appreciation for literature and his more refined speech compared to other ranchers she had met. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, her parents, her years teaching, her love of music and art. She found in Yates an attentive listener, genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences. One evening, about 3 weeks after their wedding, Yates returned from town with a surprise, a small pianoforte. "It's not new," he admitted as the ranch hands helped position it in the corner of the main room. "Mrs. Caldwell in town is moving back east, and she couldn't take it with her. When I mentioned you played, she offered to sell it for a reasonable price." Madeline stared at the instrument, tears welling in her eyes. "You remembered that I play. I only mentioned it once in my letters." Yates shrugged, looking almost embarrassed by her reaction. "I remembered most of what you wrote." Impulsively, Madeline rose on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "Thank you. This means more to me than I can express." A slight flush colored Yates's face at the unexpected gesture. "You're welcome," he said gruffly, though his eyes were warm. That evening, Madeline played for the first time since leaving Boston. Her fingers were rusty at first, but soon muscle memory took over. She played folk tunes and classical pieces, hymns, and even a few popular songs. Yates sat nearby, ostensibly reading, but she noticed his book remained unopened on his lap as he listened. When she finally stopped, her fingers tired but her spirit lighter than it had been in months, she found Yates watching her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. "My mother used to play," he said quietly. "Not as well as you, but she loved music. I'd forgotten how much I missed hearing it." "I'll play for you whenever you like," Madeline offered. "I'd like that very much," he replied, his voice soft in the lamplight. Something shifted between them that night, a deeper connection forming, bridging the careful distance they had maintained since their wedding. The following days brought another change as Yates began teaching Madeline to ride. He selected a gentle mare named Daisy for her, patiently instructing her on proper mounting, posture, and control of the animal. "You're a natural," he commented as she guided Daisy around the corral on her third lesson. "Most Eastern ladies would be terrified." "I'm finding that I enjoy challenges more than I realized," Madeline replied with a smile. Once she was comfortable on horseback, Yates began taking her on rides around the ranch, showing her the boundaries of their property, the best grazing lands, the creek that provided water even in the dry season. During these rides, Madeline saw a different side of her husband, his deep knowledge of and connection to the land, his concern for the cattle and horses in his care, and his fair treatment of the men who worked for him. "You're a good employer," she observed one afternoon as they watched Yates's foreman, Miguel, work with a young horse. "Your men respect you." "I try to be fair," Yates said. "A man who feels valued works better than one who feels used." "Is that philosophy from your books or your experience?" She teased gently. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Both, I reckon." As they rode back to the house that day, Madeline realized she was beginning to fall in love with her husband. Not the practical appreciation she had felt before, but something deeper, warmer, a genuine affection for the man himself, not just gratitude for his kindness. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky, Madeline found the courage to bridge the final gap between them. "Yates," she said softly, "I've been thinking. MMM. He turned to look at her, his profile illuminated by the light spilling from the house windows. Perhaps it's time I moved my things into our bedroom, the proper bedroom, I mean. Yates went very still. Are you certain? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, Madeline replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm your wife in name. I'd like to be your wife in truth. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Yates was as gentle and considerate as she had come to expect. His touch was reverent, his kisses tender, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Madeline found not the duty she had steeled herself for, but a surprising joy. Afterward, lying in the circle of Yates's arms, her head resting on his chest, Madeline felt a contentment she had never expected to find in this marriage of convenience. Are you all right? Yates murmured against her hair. Yes, she answered honestly. Very much so. Good, he said simply, holding her closer. In that moment, Madeline knew with certainty that she had found her home not in the ranch house or the land, but in the arms of the man she had traveled across a continent to marry. As summer faded into autumn, life at the Rocking Inn settled into a pleasant rhythm. Madeline embraced her role as ranch mistress, learning from Rosa how to manage the household, cook frontier-style meals, and preserve food for the winter months. She started a small vegetable garden beside the house, planted flowers near the porch, and even began teaching Miguel's children to read and write 3 afternoons a week. Her relationship with Yates deepened with each passing day. The initial awkwardness between them had given way to a comfortable companionship during the day and a passionate intimacy at night. They still spent their evenings reading or talking, but now Madeline often sat nestled against Yates's side, his arm around her shoulders as they discussed books, shared memories, or planned for the ranch's future. One crisp October morning, Madeline woke feeling strangely unsettled. She had been unusually tired lately, sometimes feeling queasy in the mornings. As she lay beside her sleeping husband, a realization dawned that both frightened and exhilarated her. When Yates woke, he immediately noticed her pensive expression. Something wrong? He asked, concern evident in his voice. No, not wrong, Madeline replied carefully, but I believe I might be with child. Yates froze, his eyes widening as he processed her words. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the reserved smile she had become accustomed to, but a broad, unguarded expression of joy. A baby, he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. His reaction banished any lingering doubts Madeline might have had about his feelings. Yates Newcomb wanted this child, wanted a family with her. Are you happy about it? He asked, suddenly uncertain as he studied her face. Yes, Madeline assured him, covering his hand with her own. I'm a little scared we're so far from proper doctors, but yes, I'm very happy. Doc Miller in town is a good man, Yates said, his practical nature reasserting itself. And Mrs. Caldwell was a midwife back east before she married. We'll make sure you have the care you need. He kissed her then, a tender gesture full of promise. I'll build a cradle, he decided, already planning. Oak, I think, something sturdy that can be passed down. Madeline laughed, charmed by his enthusiasm. We have some time yet. Not enough, Yates countered. There's so much to prepare. As the weeks passed and Madeline's condition became more certain, Yates became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, hired an additional woman to help with housework, and began making improvements to the ranch house, adding a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, reinforcing the porch railings, and even discussing plans to expand the house the following spring. You're going to spoil this child terribly, Madeline teased as she watched him sand the cradle he was building. Probably, Yates admitted without shame. Never thought I'd have the chance to be a father. Figured that part of life had passed me by. His candor touched her deeply. I'm glad I could give you this, she said softly. Yates set aside his work to come to her, kneeling before her chair to place both hands on her slightly swollen belly. You've given me far more than this, Madeline. You've brought life back to this house. To me. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Yates said the words that had been growing between them for months. I love you. Madeline's heart soared at the simple declaration. I love you too, Yates, so much more than I ever expected to. As winter settled over the Arizona territory, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow to their region, Madeline's pregnancy progressed steadily. Her body rounded with new life, and though she experienced the typical discomforts, she remained active and healthy. Christmas approached, and with it came Madeline's desire to establish traditions for their growing family. She decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baked special treats from her mother's recipes, and even convinced Yates to bring home a small pine tree, which they decorated with paper ornaments and strings of dried berries. On Christmas Eve, after they had exchanged simple gifts, a handcrafted jewelry box from Yates for Madeline, and a finely embroidered shirt from Madeline for Yates, they sat before the fire, enjoying the peaceful evening. I have one more gift for you, Yates said suddenly, rising to retrieve something from his desk drawer. He returned with a small, tissue-wrapped package, which he placed in Madeline's hands. Curious, she unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Oh, Yates, she breathed, opening the locket to find it empty, waiting for miniatures to be placed inside. I know it's not your mother's locket, Yates said quietly, but I thought you might want something to hold pictures of our family, our child, when they arrive. Tears filled Madeline's eyes as she remembered telling him about the loss of her mother's locket, the irreplaceable family heirloom that had been in her missing trunk. It's perfect, she whispered, clutching the new locket to her heart. Better than perfect, because it's from you for our future. As Yates fastened the chain around her neck, Madeline felt the child within her move, a strong kick that made her gasp. What is it? Yates asked, alarmed. The baby, Madeline laughed, placing his hand where their child continued to make its presence known. Someone's very active tonight. Yates's expression of wonder as he felt his child move for the first time was something Madeline knew she would cherish forever. Strong, he murmured, like its mother. And stubborn, like its father, Madeline added with a smile. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind whistle around the eaves, Madeline reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 1 year ago, she had been alone in Boston, facing a bleak future. Now she was in Arizona, married to a man she deeply loved, carrying their child beneath her heart. What are you thinking about? Yates asked, his arm drawing her closer against his side. How losing my trunk might have been the best thing that ever happened to me, Madeline confessed. If I had arrived with all my possessions, perhaps we wouldn't have connected so quickly. You might not have felt the need to take care of me. Yates considered this. I'd like to think we would have found our way to each other regardless, but I understand what you mean. Sometimes loss creates space for something new to grow. Exactly, Madeline agreed, nestling against him. And what has grown between us is more valuable than anything I could have carried in that trunk. Spring came early to the Arizona territory, bringing with it wildflowers carpeting the desert floor and the busy season on the ranch. As Madeline's time drew near, Yates arranged for Mrs. Caldwell to stay at the ranch for the final weeks of the pregnancy, her experience as a midwife providing both practical help and reassurance. The baby arrived on a warm April morning after a night of labor. Madeline, exhausted but triumphant, held their son in her arms as Yates entered the bedroom, his face pale with worry until he saw them both, safe and well. "We have a boy," Madeline said softly as Yates approached the bed cautiously. "Come meet your son." Yates sat beside them, his calloused finger gently tracing the perfect features of his newborn son. "He's beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Perfect." "I thought we might name him Marcus," Madeline suggested, "after your brother, and Henry after my father." Yates looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Marcus Henry Newcomb. It's a good name, a strong name." "For a strong boy," Madeline agreed, watching as Yates tentatively accepted the swaddled infant into his arms. The sight of her husband, this tall, powerful man, who had carved a life from the wilderness, holding their tiny son with such tenderness, and awe filled Madeline's heart to overflowing. This was what she had crossed a continent to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not just security or purpose, but love, family, and belonging. As spring turned to summer, life at the rocking inn adjusted to include its newest member. Marcus, nicknamed Marky by his adoring parents, thrived in the clean desert air. Yates proved to be a devoted father, often carrying his son in a sling as he completed his lighter duties around the ranch, showing the baby the horses, cattle, and land that would someday be his. Madeline recovered quickly from childbirth and resumed her duties as ranch mistress, now with the added joy of motherhood. She continued to teach the ranch children, now with her son nearby in his cradle, and still played the piano in the evenings, finding that the music soothed Marky to sleep as effectively as any lullaby. One warm June evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Marky sleeping peacefully in Yates's arms, a rider approached the ranch house. As he drew closer, Madeline recognized the uniform of a federal marshal. "Evening, folks," the marshal called as he dismounted. "I'm looking for Mrs. Madeline Newcomb." Yates tensed beside her, his arm tightening protectively around their son. "I'm Yates Newcomb. This is my wife. What business do you have with her?" The marshal removed his hat, revealing a weathered face beneath gray-streaked hair. "Madam, I believe we've recovered some property that might belong to you. A trunk was found in the possession of some train robbers we captured last month near Tucson. Inside was a letter addressed to you at your Boston address." Madeline gasped. "My trunk? After all this time?" "Yes, madam. It's been at the Fort Yuma station for about a week now. Station master asked me to let you know next time I was heading this way." Yates stood, carefully transferring the sleeping Marky to Madeline's arms. "Thank you, Marshal. Would you care to stay for supper?" "It's the least we can offer for bringing such news." The marshal accepted gratefully, and after a hearty meal and a night's rest, he departed the next morning. Yates immediately hitched up the wagon. "I'll go to town today and fetch your trunk," he told Madeline over breakfast. "Unless you'd prefer to come along." Madeline considered the offer but shook her head. "Marky's still a bit young for such a long trip. I'm content to wait here." Yates nodded, bending to kiss her before departing. "I'll be back before sundown." True to his word, Yates returned as the sun was setting, the wagon carrying a large, somewhat battered trunk. With Miguel's help, he brought it into the house, setting it down in the main room. "There you are," he said, watching as Madeline approached it almost reverently. "Your past returned to you." Madeline knelt before the trunk, running her fingers over the scratched lid. Inside were her clothes, books, the small keepsakes she had brought from Boston, and most precious of all, her mother's locket. "Aren't you going to open it?" Yates asked when she continued to stare at the trunk without moving to unlock it. "In a moment," Madeline said thoughtfully. She rose and went to where Marky lay in his cradle, lifting him into her arms before returning to stand beside the trunk. I wanted to hold our future while I looked at my past. Understanding softened Yates's expression. He moved to stand beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other gently touching his son's cheek. When I arrived in Fort Yuma and discovered my trunk was missing, I felt as though I had lost everything, Madeline reflected. I couldn't imagine how I would manage without my possessions. And now, Yates prompted when she fell silent. Madeline looked up at her husband, then down at their son. And now I realized that what I thought was a disaster was actually the beginning of something wonderful. If I hadn't lost my trunk, you might not have said those words that changed everything, that you would give me everything I needed and more. I meant them, Yates said softly. I still do. I know, Madeline replied. And you have, Yates. You've given me so much more than replacement for material things. You've given me love, a family, a home, everything that truly matters. She looked back at the trunk, no longer feeling the urgency to open it that she might have expected. The contents of this trunk, they're part of my past, and I'm grateful to have them back. But what we've built together, that's my present and my future. Yates bent to kiss her, a tender gesture that spoke volumes about his feelings. Our future, he corrected gently. Yours, mine, and Marky's. And perhaps others in time, Madeline added with a smile. I'd like that, Yates agreed, his eyes warm with promise. This house could use more children, more music, more life. As night fell over the rocking inn, the little family remained together in the warm glow of lamplight. Yates and Madeline side by side on the settee, Marky sleeping peacefully between them. Outside, the vast Arizona sky filled with stars, a silent witness to the love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning. The trunk, finally opened, had yielded its treasures, the tangible connections to Madeline's past. But as she placed her mother's locket beside the new one Yates had given her, Madeline knew that the most valuable things in her life couldn't be contained in any trunk, no matter how large. They were right here, in this home she had made with the man who had promised to give her everything she needed, and more, a promise he had kept beyond her wildest dreams. In the years that followed, the rocking inn prospered under Yates and Madeline's stewardship. The ranch expanded as they purchased adjacent land, increasing their herd and adding more horses. The house grew too, with additional rooms built to accommodate their growing family. First a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, born 2 years after Marcus, and then twin boys, James and William, who arrived 3 years later. Madeline's impromptu teaching of the ranch children eventually evolved into a proper school, housed in a small building Yates constructed near the main house. Children from neighboring ranches rode in for lessons 3 days a week, and Madeline found deep satisfaction in sharing her love of learning with the next generation of Westerners. Yates's pride in his wife's accomplishments was evident to all who knew them. When visitors expressed surprise at finding such an educated woman on a remote ranch, Yates would smile and say, "My Madeline brings civilization to the wilderness without taming its spirit. That's a rare gift." As their children grew, Madeline and Yates made certain they appreciated both their Western heritage and their Eastern roots. Summers were spent learning ranch work alongside their father, even Elizabeth, who proved to have a natural way with horses. Winters included more formal education, music lessons with their mother, and readings from the classics that filled the bookshelves. Yates continued to expand year after year. The trunk that had been lost and found now sat in a place of honor in the main room, serving as a reminder of how their unusual love story began. Occasionally, Madeline would open it to show the children some treasure from her Boston days, a fan, a book, a piece of lace telling them stories of her life before she came west. "Were you sad to leave Boston, Mama?" 10-year-old Elizabeth asked one rainy afternoon as Madeline showed her a small watercolor of her childhood home. "Not sad, exactly," Madeline replied thoughtfully. "Afraid, perhaps. It's always frightening to leave what you know for something unknown." "But you were brave," Elizabeth said with certainty. "I was desperate," Madeline corrected with a smile. "Sometimes courage comes from having no other choice. Are you glad you came, even though it was scary?" Madeline looked up to see Yates standing in the doorway, listening to their conversation. After 15 years of marriage, his presence still made her heart beat faster. His smile still warmed her from within. "Coming west was the best decision I ever made," she told her daughter honestly. "Sometimes the scariest choices lead to the greatest happiness." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Madeline and Yates sat on the porch, a habit they had maintained throughout their marriage. Though their days were busy with ranch work, children, and community obligations, they guarded this time together, using it to reconnect and remember why they had chosen each other. "You never did tell Elizabeth the whole story," Yates observed, his fingers laced with Madeline's. "About how you arrived with nothing but a reticule." "Some stories are just for us," Madeline replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I suspect Marcus knows. He was asking me about my arrival yesterday, seemed very interested in how we met." "He's sweet on the Harrington girl," Yates explained. "Overheard him telling James that her father arranged a marriage with that rancher from New Mexico." Madeline straightened in concern. "Lydia Harrington, but she's only 16. 17, Yates corrected. "Same age you were thinking of becoming a mail-order bride." "I was 23, Madeline reminded him. "And times have changed. Girls have more options now." "Not always out here," Yates said gently. "Frontier still makes its own rules sometimes." Madeline sighed, acknowledging the truth in his words. "Still, I hope Marcus doesn't do anything foolish, like offering to marry her himself," Yates suggested with a raised eyebrow. "Our son is his father's son, stubborn when he sets his mind on something." "Or someone," Madeline added, a smile playing at her lips despite her concern. "I suppose we should be prepared for some drama." "Life's rarely dull with 4 children," Yates agreed, "but I wouldn't have it any other way." "Nor would I," Madeline said softly. "Everything that's happened since I stepped off that train, the good and the bad, the easy and the difficult, I wouldn't change any of it." Yates lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "I promised to give you everything you needed," he reminded her. "I never expected you'd give me so much more in return." As the stars appeared in the vast desert sky, Madeline leaned against her husband, content in the life they had built together. From loss had come finding, from desperation, hope, from a practical arrangement, deep and abiding love. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself as a young woman in Boston, but it was infinitely richer, fuller, and more satisfying than anything she could have dreamed. "Look," Yates said softly, pointing to the horizon where a shooting star streaked across the darkness. "Make a wish." Madeline smiled, watching the brief, brilliant light. "I don't need to," she said simply. "I already have everything I could ever wish for." Yates's arm tightened around her shoulders. "As do I, Mrs. Newcomb. As do I." Together, they watched the night sky from the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the love that had begun with a lost trunk and 7 simple words. "I'll give you everything you need and more." It was a promise made and kept, every day by both of them, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm, a love deep enough to last a lifetime.